Right, let's start.
All right, so I will be the one starting the presentation, and I'll be the one talking more about computers than board games. And I would like to, I know that a lot of you are there because you're coming from history and you make games, or you want to make games better. But we want to kind of totally pivot in that, and do it the other way around and say, how can we use games to make our study of history better? How can we be better historians or archaeologists thanks to games? And a good start is always to start to ask why is that we ever doing it? Like, why do we do history? What's the point of our work? And I think for most of us in both history and archaeology, we trained in this kind of frame of mind where we do our research in order to say what has happened in the past. And that's very aptly summarized by Winston Churchill, who said, well, history is simply one damn thing after another. And the truth is that this actually represents our disciplines quite well, but it doesn't have to be like that. And shockingly enough, to counteract the wisdom of Churchill, I pulled this fun article from The Onion. It says historians politely remind the nation to check what's happened in the past before making any big decisions. And the whole point of our work and research and the game and everything is basically to put history and prehistory back to the table, where it actually impacts on decisions that are made nowadays, and show that it is actually relevant and not just something that we do just for entertainment value. But in order to be that kind of discipline, in order to be able to say, well, actually the potential trajectories of what may happen next are those, we have to use specific methods. And the one method that is really missing in historical research, and I will happily stand by the statement, then that applies to both history and archaeology and pretty much any humanities that I'm aware of. That method is modeling. So let's start from the very basics of what is a model. And because all of you do games, this is the easiest presentation in history, because you'll recognize 100% of what I'm talking about. All right, so as an example, I gave you a model of the city that we're currently in. And you will recognize it's Google Maps. It's a map of the city, and it's a model of the city of Aarhus, right? It even shows how to get from the offices where history is based to a restaurant in the downtown. And as a model, it represents the reality in certain ways. So it does represent the city of Aarhus. It's obviously different than the city of Aarhus in many fundamental aspects. For example, this is a map. It's two-dimensional, and you may believe or not believe it, but I guarantee the city of Aarhus has 3 dimensions. We're not on the flat earth here. There's, buildings have height, etc. We also don't have any floating letters over our buildings. And in general, it's not gray. The color is completely wrong. Like the city is mostly yellow and red, and definitely not gray. So there are certain things that are well represented. For example, the distances, that it is actually the distance to the scaled to the restaurant from Nobelparken, the place where all historians sit. And it shows the streets really well. And it also even shows you where the water is, so where the waterfront is located. You can find where green spaces are, etc., etc. So it's a representation of the city, and it has some aspects that are true and some aspects that are not true. And this is the definition of a model. So it's an abstract, simplified representation of the world, and it preserves some aspects of reality, but not all of them. If it represented all aspects of reality, then it would be the reality, right? So from that, it kind of logically follows that there are multiple models of any one system, and all of them are equally correct, and all of them are equally good. It's just they represent different aspects. All right. Okay. We do some maps in history and archaeology, so it's not entirely true that we don't do any modeling. But there are other types of models that are done less so. As I said, maps are definitely done, and if you're lucky, there are some people that even do statistical modeling, such as regression. And the one thing that we all do a lot in humanities and in historical research is conceptual modeling, which is basically coming up with verbal explanation for things. Well, this has happened because of this, or the reason why this occurred is this and this and this, or the mechanism that drove this system is the following. And so all of those are models. They are conceptual models. And now what we want to talk to you about is a formalization of such models. And the formalization of such models, a technique that is used is called simulation. And it represents dynamic models of processes and mechanisms that unravel over time. And when you think about it, it's a very good definition to games as well. Those are representations of real systems that preserve some aspects of those systems, but not all, that show you processes and mechanisms of how the system works, and they unravel over time. I mean, it cannot be any better. All right, so the particular type of modeling that I do, and Tom as well, is called agent-based modeling, and you're gonna love it because it wasn't designed for humanities, but it's perfect for humanities. So the main components are little agents, and those little agents, they can have variables, so age, gender, social status, wealth, you know, just like almost in any game where you have your characters and they're the types of characters and they have specific characteristics to them. And they all live in this environment, and the environment can be anything. It could be a city, it could be the countryside, it could be a continent, but there's an interaction with the space around them. And over time, they evolve and develop, and the whole system kind of goes through those dynamic processes that drive it. So just like in most games, there is an evolution of the system over time. All right. When it comes to agents, they're the key element of the technique. They're individual, so each is a separate software unit. In fact, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, SimCity basically made all of their agents, the little kind of humans that walk around the streets, individual, and became an agent-based simulation. And so each agent, they can have their attributes, which makes and because when you combine those attributes, you create those unique agents within the population. So you don't have a population of exactly the same kind of type of people. Every single one can be different, and they can also adapt and change rule of behavior, and they react to whatever is their unique circumstances in which they find themselves. So when you think about it, they're like us, right? They're like humans. Each of us have our attributes, and although the attributes may be the same, you know, we all have age or a wealth status or socioeconomic status, or a number of kids, or, you know, educational level. The combination of those attributes create very unique people. And it's also true that we react to whatever is happening in our kind of nearest surroundings, and we follow the rules that we think will give us the best outcomes, and all of those are dependent on our very much individual circumstances. So there's this particular type of simulation really does capture a lot of the uniqueness and the great features of humans and the population. But it also allows us to model what happens with the population as a whole based on the decisions and the behaviors of individuals. So each agent, they have their local situation, and they assesses that situation and behaves accordingly. But their knowledge about the world is bounded. That just means that they don't have a full knowledge, and they not necessarily have full rationality, which means that they may not always choose what's actually best for them, either because they don't know what's best for them, or because they don't care, they just need it good enough, or because they just made a mistake, which unfortunately also happens in life. And everything is very flexible. So the real rules of behaviors may change depending on the system level. Agents themselves may react to certain situations differently depending on some more general changes in the evolution of the system. So pretty much anything goes. You can model any system doing anything, following any rules you fancy. And the only limitation is pretty much the computational power of your laptop or a supercomputer if you have one of those. So out of those great combination of agents and interactions and rules of behavior, we end up with a simulation. And in our case, because that's what interests us, those are the simulation of what has happened in the past. The interesting thing about those is that very often you see what is called emergence. So from the simple interactions of agents, you get those completely unexpected patterns on the population level. Agents may be buying and selling or moving houses, and all of a sudden you see patterns of behavior on the population level that you wouldn't predict if you were just told those few simple rules. And it enables us to test those alternative realities where you have this in silico laboratory where you can see what happens to your population if you, I don't know, throw a plague at them, or for example, increase taxation to some crazy level. So you can do experiments, first of all, that are ethical, so you're not actually using humans, everyone's fine, but also that allows you to test scenarios that may not necessarily be that plausible or possible, and then see whether it might have happened in the past. And it's all very process focused. So the goal here is not do what Winston Churchill said. It's not to reconstruct, oh, first this happened and then this happened and then this happened, but to understand why things happened and how did they happen the way they did. So that causality is at the core of simulation and agent-based modeling. And I just wanted to give you two very quick examples because it all sounds really abstract. So the first one is and this is as far from history as I can imagine. So imagine moving 2 million years backwards, 2 million. We're not even on the Homo sapiens territory. The first people, the first Homo, left Africa. And there were many different ideas about why did they do it and what enabled them to leave Africa and spread all around the world. There were ideas about them mastering fire. There were ideas about better technology. There were ideas about change in the kind of social systems, or maybe the emergence of language. And at the end of the day, we don't really know, right? I mean, nobody was taking notes 2 million years ago, unfortunately. All we have is a few archaeological sites that are found in different places around the world. So a simulation was run. And that simulation has been done quite a few times. That basically showed that the main focus of all of this was geography, the changes of the biomes and how climates change, and basically enables our ancestors, very far away ancestors, to spread around the world. And the exact geographical pattern of how it happened was actually recreated in a computer. And it turns out that whatever you give your agents, whether you give them better technology or fire, whatever, it doesn't actually matter. What mattered was just the climate. So the goal here was to kind of trying to figure out what was the driving force behind it. What was the most important factor? And the simulation quite convincingly said, well, yeah, it was basically the geography of the world, the fact that there's limited number of ways out of Africa if you don't know how to swim, and the underlying environmental conditions that were there. For something much closer to the current days, this is a foundational model called artificial Anasazi, and Anasazi, currently called Pueblo people. They lived in this valley, so you've got the picture of the valley. And they created those amazing cities and those settlements that are just great. And they went for a few ups and downs, and then they just left. I think they moved to Nevada. And all of this was happening, you know, about, well, 1,000 to, you know, what, 800 years ago, 700 years ago. So all of this was happening, you know, in a specific circumstances in New Mexico and Colorado. And for a very long time, again, archaeologists were walking around and trying to figure out what has caused Anasazi to basically go through those fluctuations and then leave. And that was one of the first agent-based models that was ever developed. And you can see that they basically recreated this artificial society, and they gave them their corn, they made them move around and change locations of their farms, etc., etc. And they managed, you see the red line, they managed to simulate the trajectory of the population really, really well. And again, this enabled them to test different scenarios of what has caused that. Why did they go up and then down and up and then they left? And at that time, there were quite a few hypotheses about it, including some related to increased levels of aggression and warfare, as well as social changes that were, you know, visible for archaeological record. And again, I mean, it's getting a bit boring, but it turns out that drought was a great explanation and actually explains about 90% of the variability that we're seeing in the kind of ups and downs of the old Anasazi.
Okay.
And I apologize for that. Tom will deal with the emergency and I'll carry on. All right. So those were two examples of agent-based models. And you know, if you looked at those simulations, and you can actually go and have a look at them because they're freely available, you'll see how many in so many places they resemble games. And they resemble games because they focus not on events that happened, but on processes and mechanisms that drive human societies in the past. And this was also the reason why we went into making games.
Yeah, and this barging in of our kids was actually entirely appropriate because they feature in the presentation. See if you can spot them. But what does all of this simulation stuff and the agent-based modeling have to do with the board game? Because this board game totally exists. We totally made a board game. We promised we would talk about it, and that's what's going to happen now. But the simulation and the agent-based modeling is at the heart of all of our research that we do. As Isa said, we tend to study past systems, in our case, the Roman economy, for example, using these agent-based modeling and simulation techniques. And so we use the board game as a different medium for, on the one hand, communicating the research that we do and how we do research about the Roman economy, and on the other hand, for explaining to historians, classicists, and archaeologists what the logic of simulation is and what agent-based modeling is, and to help that educate in that way. Let me tell you a little bit first about the reasons why we made this board game. So this is where the kids come in. The reality was we, you know, Isa, myself, and Sean, we planned to do some research, which was very, very, very dry. It was research based on comparing code of different simulation models. But at around that time, we also got kids, and we realized that certain types of research were hard to do in practice. But what we felt was still very possible was to, together with the three of us, explore board games, play board games, criticize board games, and think through board games from the perspective of our own research. So in practice, we made a board game. That's the reality. But it turned out that, you know, making a board game was also extremely on the Romans. So Sean and myself, we tend to work a lot on the study of the Roman Empire, and Isa's doing that in recent work as well. The Roman Empire was a huge system, comparable in size to the present-day European Union. And it was also surprisingly well integrated. So, you know, it was politically integrated. There was one emperor governing the entire thing. It was legally integrated to some extent. So there were laws that had to be applied and were valid no matter where you are in the empire. It was also, there was a monetary integration, so there was a currency that could be used throughout that vast area. But we're, you know, talking about places as diverse as Egypt with its rich history, and Britain, you know, very different places with their own local logics, their own peoples, their own cultures, all of a sudden being brought together in an integrated system. And we tend to explore how that system functioned. As archaeologists, we tend to do that with the evidence that we have, which is pots, like bowls and cups, but also containers, like the plastic bottles of the ancient world. And so there's a lot of theories about how the Roman Empire functioned and how the Roman economy functioned. Much of the work that Isa, myself, and Sean have done is creating agent-based models that represent a particular theory about how we think the Roman economy functioned. How, you know, in Roman times, was it possible for vast amounts of grain to be produced in the fertile floodplains of Egypt and then be transported, tons and tons of the stuff, consistently to the capital of Rome to feed a population of more than 1 million, you know, every single day? Those were huge things. So there's a lot of different theories that could potentially explain those. They tend to focus on a number of factors that we explore in our simulations. Things like how expensive it was to transport things over long distances. What was the technology that was available at the time? You know, like what were those ships like that transported grain from Egypt to all over the empire, but also Rome? And how fast could they travel? How much grain could go in that? And what are the implications for the price of the grain? How do people also negotiate the prices, being so disconnected? They couldn't just say, like, listen, I'm here in Alexandria, you know, there's a ship coming your way in Rome. It's so many tons. Tell me what the price is in Rome. Right. Okay, we'll settle on this price and I'll tell the ship to go. Right. They couldn't do these kind of things. There was a lot of informational uncertainty. So how did the system function despite having so little information available to them or so much uncertainty in the information? And so those are the kind of theories that we tend to do in our simulation work. And so we made a board game that represents aspects of them. So here's the board of FORVM. And we thought, like, you know, the key thing in all of our studies tends to be this macroeconomics perspective. So we are looking at the entire empire. And we tend to explore how stuff was produced very, you know, in one place and distributed all over the empire. So we were interested in theories related to very, very long distance transport and very long distance flows of information. So we made a board that represents this as a network. And at the center of the network, we have Rome. Our game is about a group of aristocratic families who have commercial interests. They are based in Rome, but they want to trade all over the empire. And so they are setting up these trade empires. But we wanted to reflect our theory that it's very expensive and difficult to gather information the further you move away. So that as you move away over the network, you see the color of those cities changing. That just represents that it's more and more expensive to gather information from those places that are further and further away from Rome, because it's more difficult to gather information from them. We also have a representation of travel costs. So as you can only move over the links in the network. So that's kind of a representation of the ancient transport system. But the further you move away, the more expensive it is to get profits. So the amount of profit that you can see in these numbers here decreases with the physical distance as you move away from Rome. And then another thing that's very important in our research is, the big narratives in history and archaeology, especially the Roman Empire, tend to focus on the emperors and the rich people and their prestige. And one of those tropes is that these people tended not to get their hands dirty in basic stuff like commerce, for example, which was blatantly not true. So this was an element that we wanted to popularize as well. This game is all about money, and you have to make loads and loads of money in order to win the game. But the money translates directly into prestige, into stuff the aristocrats care about. And so if you become the most prestigious person, you can become the consul of Rome and you can win the game. But that only happens because of this interplay between money and prestige. We also try to sneak in a lot of details about the Roman world, just for, just blatant outreach purposes. We want to communicate ideas about the Roman world. So we have like cards related to events like new port infrastructure or new emperors. These are all real things. And then at the back of every card, so there's a rule, something you need to do. But we snuck in a little bit of history on every single card. And there's about like 300 of those. So, a lot of sneaky history. And then at the back of the booklet also, we've got like, we've got an academic paper because we couldn't help ourselves. But we've also got like a bit of a glossary of key terms, a reference list, and some timelines. So, we're academics. But we also use this for outreach and education, and it's turned out to be really powerful. So, I personally use it in my teaching to demonstrate how board games can be used as an outreach tool. And I know of 2 other courses in the US where the board game is used in their teaching. It's also used as an outreach tool for a couple of research centers, like the University of Barcelona Institute for Complex Systems. So here, for example, we're looking at a group of physicists and a few archaeologists who are playing, a blatantly intellectual kind of board game, educational board game, and they're learning something about like our theories that we were there to explore together with them in a collaboration, and about how the Roman economy functioned and what the Roman economy was, which was a very fun experience.
Physicist won.
Yeah, the physicists won, and the creators of the game lost, which is
All right. So just to kind of take it all together, and bring all of those bits of information and the simulation side and ABM on the one hand and the game on the other. When you think about any game, the first thing you think about is that there are certain rules, and those rules are given by the creators of the game. And those rules, as well as all the entities that go into the game, they're very often, pretty much always, some form of abstracted reality. So whether it's a medieval castle thing, or a power grid in Germany, or the pandemic, which turned out to be a very reality close game recently, it's all representing some kind of reality in a simplified way. But the rules are stable. So, it's not that throughout in the middle of a game, all of a sudden you can, start throwing a dice that is up to 20 and not up to 6. And you play through those rules step by step. So, you have the first round and you have the second round, And so the things go over time. And that makes board game very much an analog simulation. It really doesn't differ from the simulations that we make in any way other than, I run 300,000 runs of my simulation in an hour, whereas if you were to play it, it's probably going to take you some more time. But as a kind of in a philosophical sense and even theoretical sense, they are equivalent. And when you think about games, every game is different, right? Like every time you play, the outcome is different. If it's not, then that means this is not a good game. And so by playing games, we learn that, the historical trajectories, they could have gone in many different ways. They could have gone in different places, and sometimes due to pretty minor events or pretty minor differences in, say, the characters of the players, for example. And finally, this is Tom's favorite bit, because he's one of 4 kids, and he claims this is what all families do. Usually when you play games, you have this conflict between players, and then, families establish their own rules of playing and eventually agree on those. And that very much reminds me of the academic system. We all have our idea of what has happened in the past and why it happened. And then, simulation allows you to run those ideas. And then other people will come and say, well, actually, no, Romans could not move, over a network, or change some other aspect of it. And then they can run it themselves and see what would be the repercussions of changing of those rules. So it is also a tool for collaborative research that extends over time and enables us to work on those topics in a cumulative fashion. So not starting from scratch every single time, but actually building upon previous work and making it better and better and better to better understand those past systems. So to illustrate it, Tom also put those two pictures on the right-hand side. Here you have the whiteboard, the flipboard that we use to develop the game, and you can see those little kind of things of like, okay, well, let's start the setup. Everyone gets 100 sesterces, yeah. And then you get the family cards, etc., etc., and then you go through those phases of the game. You move, you do the social entry, you trade, you build, you check your fate cards, etc., and then you specified every single one of those. For example, to trade, you get the money from your emporia, and then you update how much money you have in total. And this very much, on the left hand side, you have basically the pseudocode of a similar agent-based model, and it's basically you can translate it one to one. It would be exactly the same. So this is where we kind of came with this idea that board games are very much an analog version of our models. All right, so to sum it all up, we do believe that games can be used to help people to understand the role of simulation in historical research, and we hope that this basically puts it into this epistemological spectrum. So it's not mixed up with data, it's not mixed up with other types of research, that it helps people to understand why and when would you need to do a simulation in your particular research project. And it also very nicely illustrates how simulations are developed. You have to think, who are the players, what are the pawns, what rules, like what kind of environment they live on, what kind of rules we develop, what parts of reality do we translate into a game, and which ones do we leave out, because as far as we're concerned are not relevant. And all of this enables us to switch historical research more toward the systemic perspective, where we stop focusing so much on events and people and the kind of order of things, and start thinking in this kind of societal level of changes. Why has those things happened the way they happened? Why did this war start at this time and not earlier or later? What kind of conditions enable it to go forward? What would have happened if one of those conditions was not met? And this is a really useful perspective. It's not the only perspective that you can have in historical research, but it is one that is very much underdeveloped and under research in archaeology, classics, or history. And it really can bring you a lot of understanding of the past and some crazy surprises, absolutely crazy surprises. And it also shines light on the role of explanation in historical research. Why do we need to know how and why things happen? Maybe it's enough to just say, first this happened, then this, then this, then this, then that. Well, we as you've seen at the beginning, we do believe that once you understand why things happen, then you are able to look at those long-term trajectories of societies, and you may be able to suggest the potential trajectories for the current societies that are facing quite some challenges at the moment. So we think the board games can be used as an analog simulations to help our disciplines to kind of go forward with those type of research. So in a way, it's the kind of inward outreach, right? It's in reach, let's call it this way, where we you know, it's always fun to talk to people that are not other researchers, but it's incredibly fun to talk to other researchers and talk about your types of research and seeing whether they understand what it is that we're doing and why would you be doing it. And maybe that will also mean that more people will start doing this type of research, and we will learn more about the long and large systemic perspectives and in the past. All right. And, oh, I almost forgot. Sorry. Shameless advertising. For any one of you that is in any way interested, this fantastic, absolutely brilliant new textbook has been developed by those 3 people that you can see at the bottom here. That is me, my friends Colin and Stephanie. And we wrote a textbook to help people in archaeology, history, classics, and any other social science to learn how to code their simulations, how to practice the topics they may be interested in, and what kind of cool research they can do if they turn their computer into a simulation machine, and what kind of crazy stuff they may learn about the past. So if you're in any way interested, please Google the book. You can download it from the publisher's website completely for free. And if you really want to have a paper copy, and I know you do, because we're humanities and paper copies of books are important, it's incredibly cheap and you can get it on Amazon for like a tenner. So with the shameless advertising, I think we're gonna, the second part of the shameless advertising. Yeah, sorry.
This is just a link
to
our board game, which is a real thing. And you can find it on FORVM.ca. So that's forum with a V because it's about the Romans. And do check it out. And, you know, but thank you so much for having us. And thank you to everyone who supported the project as well. That's it from us.
Fantastic.